Hi, Mandalyn. My name's Ashley. It's nice to have you in my group. My last group was pretty much all high school people, so I'm excited to have somebody that's also working in the elementary level in my group to kind of, I don't know, talk and get ideas from. So the first one that you chose was number two about the counselor accepting a friend request on Facebook from her student. And you talked about how she didn't want to ignore, or the scenario talked about how she didn't want to ignore him and she thought she would get a better insight as to what his life was like outside of school. And you mentioned something about it blurred the lines of professionalism versus like a professional relationship versus a personal relationship. And I totally agree. I think we all know that she broke that code of ethics right there and accepting that. And I think a better way for her to have handled that would have been to just have a conversation. Once she saw that, she could have had a conversation with him around why she couldn't do that and why it wasn't appropriate. I really like how you talked about having a therapeutic contract with relationship boundaries with him and letting him know why that's necessary and what that looks like. I think it's important for him to be a part of that process to understand, because you don't want to diminish or sever that relationship with him, because relationships are what make us successful in this type of work that we're doing. And then you also talked about clarifying the relationship, and it's not personal, it is professional. And if he sees you in your personal life, he might create, I don't know, ideas about what you, I don't know, it might change his idea of what you are and who you are and what you have to offer. So I really liked those ideas that you said. The next one you talked about was number eight, with the 15-year-old boy who was experiencing confusion about his sexual orientation. And I also chose this one. And I mostly chose it because I was pretty unsure of what to do. And you brought up points that I didn't even think of. You the first thing that you said was that you wouldn't feel competent in counseling or working with him, so you would refer him out. And I honestly, I didn't even really, that didn't come up to me. And I think mostly I didn't think about that because we talked about not referring out so much, trying to be competent and trying to look for resources to help these kiddos. So my thoughts were obviously the confidentiality and consent portion. It's like this, how do we balance that with the students? So I thought about, okay, obviously we have to have the consent, and I would have a conversation with the student about what that meant and what he would be willing to tell his parents. But when it came to the competence portion of it, I would think about, if you weren't sure of how to handle it, because it could be more detrimental to his growth than helpful. Maybe bringing in outside resources, talking to people, or other colleagues or other counselors about it and ways that you can support him. And then also doing just some research. I know in our last in the multicultural class, we got a lot of websites and resources for helping students and people who are a little bit confused about sexual orientation, or whose sexual orientation is different than ours, and how best ways to help them. So I thought that could be something else that could be done. And even just giving him those resources, giving him those websites could also be helpful for the student. And then the last one you talked about, which I can relate with the most, is the parent separation and divorce, and how they wanted to start a counseling group. And my immediate thought was, well, those kids aren't necessarily having difficulties, aren't expressing difficulties in class. So the counselor herself is just seeking them out. And while it's a proactive approach, and I appreciate that, I think, like you said, these little itty bitties don't really understand how their feelings connect to their life or to the events that are happening in their life. And so maybe addressing it, not necessarily kids who are going through divorce, but maybe kids who are a little bit dysregulated, and working on a group that's more around, I don't know, just like feelings and encouragement, like you said, encouragement to accept the emotions that they're feeling. And yeah, you talked about a lot of resources you read were saying using toys and manipulatives and talking around the subject. Sounds like a lot of play therapy. And I worked in my setting, I was doing academic and behavior intervention for pre-K through 2 around the school district. And I worked really closely with a mental health professional, and she would come in and we would do, obviously with parent consent, and we would do like small play therapy groups with the kids and their peers, and it was just all play and all the emotions, and all you can see what they're kind of going through within the way that they interact with humans or the way that they interact with toys and manipulatives, and you work through regulating those emotions and those feelings within the play group, and then that kind of transfers to the social events that happen in school. So those things are really helpful. You talked about bringing in family sessions and private or private sessions rather than group sessions. I do think that, and then bringing in family also, I do think that having group sessions around emotions and feelings and regulation is really helpful, because the kids get to practice and interact with each other, because what's happening at home is we're seeing how that affects them at school, and it might not necessarily be like my parents are getting divorced and this is this, but it's more or less, how am I handling the social situations at home or at school? So giving them the opportunity in groups to practice with each other, especially with other kids who are also feeling a little bit dysregulated, is really helpful in the sense that it gives them the time and the place to be dysregulated and then to work through that. But I did like the idea of having family sessions come in also, and bringing in the families. I'm not sure how that works on campus. I'm not sure if I've never personally been known about families coming in and doing family therapy on campuses, but that's something to definitely think about and look into. And then the last thing that you talked about was your transfer student, your kiddo. Man, I've seen so many kids who are in the same exact situation, and it's really challenging. And I was really surprised, incredibly surprised, when you said that your counselor said that they don't provide personal counseling services. And I understand that you were super incredibly frustrated and sad and mad. And your principal didn't have anything to say, because here you are trying to be an advocate for this child and trying to help him through the stressors of his home life, and see what you can do for him at school. And it seems like nobody was there to support you. And so I'm curious to know of how that played out for you and for him, and what school was like for him. What were his behaviors like? Did you see any of that? Um, did you see any of that come out at school? Any of the, obviously he was so willing and open to talk about it. It's so funny how little kids, I think older kids are a little bit more hesitant to talk about what happens at home, but little kids will just tell you everything, especially if they trust you and you have that relationship with them. They will tell you any and everything. And so I'm curious to know, and if it ever comes up again, how that worked out for him for the rest of the year. And I really hope that he ends up staying at your school and that you continue to have that relationship with him, because it sounds like you're somebody this little boy needs in his life. Yeah. So I also wanted to say, in talking about that, with a huge buzz phrase, and I'm sure we all know, is this prison to pipeline scenario. And this little boy just seems like, if he doesn't get that help and he doesn't get those services, or he doesn't have anybody to advocate for him the way you do, that I fear that that's what's going to happen to him, because as you said, with his dad and his mom, and and he's already in that situation. So yeah, thanks for sharing that, and I look forward to continue working with you. Bye.